Okay, so here we are. So this chapter is chapter number 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, and it is called Renunciation of Action in Knowledge. I would like to dedicate this session to my sister-in-law. She passed away 1 hour ago in Nairobi, Kenya. And although it is something which, could have made me not to take this session today, I think it is Gurudev's grace that we have this knowledge, and this knowledge is what helps us all the time in our lives. And I would dedicate this session to my Bhabi, Jayaben Kanjibai Patni. Thank you. So, renunciation of action in knowledge. And this is living through the life through the highest knowledge. So, we've been talking about living through the Gita. And the idea is that, how do we take the ideas within the Bhagavad Gita, the deep philosophical ideas which Lord Krishna gave to Arjuna, and how we can then translate those in our own lives and make that difference in our own lives, because it is all about inner change, inner transformation. And that gives us two things which I mentioned before. Number one is that it gives us the equanimity in life. In other words, all the challenges which we meet on a day-to-day basis, sometimes very severe challenges as we are experiencing now, or any challenge which comes into your life, you are able to bounce back again into a state of equanimity. And this is really resilience of the individual. That resilience is available to us through the practice of the Bhagavad Gita. Secondly, it gives us dexterity in action. In other words, that we are able to carry out the right action at the right time with the right attitude and the right belief, knowing what is good and knowing what is right. And these two things are what are available to us as we study and practice the Bhagavad Gita. So, renunciation of action in knowledge. So, what have we covered so far? We have covered the Bhagavad Gita, the setting of the teaching, and session 2, we looked at Arjuna's condition. Arjuna's condition was that he was totally distressed, and it made him to say, I don't want to fight. Here's the greatest warrior in the middle of the battlefield, and he's saying, I don't want to fight. So in this distressed condition, Bhagavan actually starts giving him the guidance. And we saw the overview of the guidance in chapter number 2, in session number 2. And in session number 3, we saw in detail Bhagavan's response and overall teaching. He taught Arjuna about Sankhya Yoga, which is really the basis of the philosophical knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita. And he gave him the ideas about Karma Yoga, which is the active life. So on the one hand, the contemplative life associated with Sankhya Yoga and knowledge. On the other hand, Karma Yoga, which is to do with action in life, making choices and carrying out our action in life. And then he taught him the person of perfection who is established in the knowledge. What are the attributes of such a person? And when we look at these three things, really what Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna is that Sankhya and Karma taken together lead one to perfection. Perfection in life and living, when one gets established in the knowledge. And this knowledge is not any knowledge, but the knowledge of the self, of course. So this is the knowledge of the self. And in session number 4, we saw in great detail what Karma Yoga is. And Karma Yoga, we saw the nature of action and the cosmic dimension of action, which is yajna, which is a very key kind of concept in chapter number 3. And he talks about this cosmic idea of action as it started off right from the very beginning of creation, and how this sacrifice kind of becomes the inherent embedded process within the whole total universe. And at the individual level, then it shows us the direction as to how to perform action within the spirit of this yajna. And what Lord Krishna says is that if we kind of align ourselves and become resonant with this idea of yajna, sacrifice in our lives, then it becomes like karma yoga. So karma yoga is not only the individual functioning in a certain way, but he or she is aligning herself or himself to the total cosmic dimension, because this is how the cosmos is built up. And what we have to do is to defeat this enemy within called desire. And also Lord Krishna then begins to expound the relationship between action and knowledge. So this is what we saw right up to session number 4. And we saw that there is a kind of logic and a flow of thought which Bhagavan is going to follow right to the Bhagavad Gita. And we are keeping track of these different ideas as they develop, as they come, they are introduced to us, and how introduction of certain ideas leads us to think about other ideas, and how those connections are built up by the master teacher himself, Lord Krishna. So at the end of then chapter number 3, Karma Yoga, knowledge and action, this is the relationship which is given by Lord Krishna. And the idea is that here is this enemy within called desire. And if you think about desire, it is really the hallmark of our ego identity. The ego identity functions on the basis of desire. It goes out into the world trying to fulfill its desire, to acquire things and to protect things. And that is how the ego individual spends his or her life. Now, if you think about this as the hallmark of the ego, then what Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna is that destroy this enemy within, because Arjuna understands the language of enemy, the language of conquering this enemy. Okay, and this is what Lord Krishna is telling him, that knowing the self-knowledge is superior to the intellect. And how is that going to be done? Restraining the self through karma yoga, through action. So both the components are now here, knowledge and action. And he says, by the self, jnana yoga, slay the enemy called desire. Okay. In other words, that what he's saying is that if we take desire as the basis of the ego identity, then in order to transcend this ego identity, we need to tackle it right at the core of this ego identity, which is desire. And how are we going to do that? By knowing the self, superior to the intellect. In other words, transcending the intellect, restraining the self, which is the individual self, through karma yoga, and by the self, jnana yoga, slay the enemy called desire. And we know that is hard to conquer, no doubt hard to conquer, but this is what needs to be done. So this is kind of leading us into thinking about knowledge and action. So on the one hand, the knowledge which is really at the intellectual level, and the karma yoga which is at the level of the body and the transactions in the world. How can these two things come together and make us to be able to slay this enemy called desire? Okay. So this is where we kind of ended in the last chapter, chapter number 3, Karma Yoga. So here in chapter number 4, then it is about renunciation of action in knowledge. So the relationship between the last chapter and this chapter is that how then can we begin to incorporate knowledge in our Karma Yoga in such a way that we begin to develop ourselves in the spiritual path and have this transformation which is based on this deep understanding of this knowledge and the awareness of the self as we center ourselves while we are functioning in the world. So the themes in chapter number 4 are the logic and flow of thought so far, which I'm going to kind of go in a bit more detail. The revelation of the divine. This is the first time now that Lord Krishna is revealing himself as the divine incarnation and also declaring his purpose. Very important. And he says, if you understand me in this right way, you will get liberated. So action, knowledge of, and relationship to the divine is then given in the next section of this chapter, and the secret of right action, wrong action, and inaction is given, and action as sacrifice. See, again, we come back to this idea of yajna, which is happening at the cosmic level, but now Lord Krishna is going to describe to Arjuna the sacrifice which is done in the highest knowledge. And he gives us 12 examples of these sacrifices, and we will look in detail at these and what they are in the context of the knowledge. So knowledge sacrifice and the sword of knowledge. This is what he finally concludes with. And of course, what will you do now? Homework. So homework, I hope you've been doing homework so far and following all the kind of practical things which you need to do in terms of the kind of practices which were described in the last chapter as well. So hopefully we will cover that as well today in relationship to this chapter. So let's go to the logic and the flow of thought so far, because sometimes it's easy to get lost in individual verses, and it's because there are 700 verses. Now, how are we going to make sense of it? And it is important for us to remember that there is a logic, there is a flow of thought, and we need to kind of keep on following it again and again so that it becomes very clear in our mind. So Arjuna is in a state of distress in the middle of the battlefield. That was chapter number 1. He is overcome with grief at the prospect of slaying his kith and kin, and he argues with Lord Krishna that he is not going to fight. He surrenders to Bhagwan Krishna and asks him to tell him decisively what to do, because he's in a state of confusion. He says, I don't know what to do. And he puts his bow and arrow down and says, tell me decisively what to do. Okay, so he hands over control to Lord Krishna and says, I surrender to you. And this is also what we discussed, is this kind of surrender to the higher power, to Lord Krishna, is important if we are to really understand and to imbibe the spiritual knowledge within our life as well. So Lord Krishna responds to him by revealing the overall solution for the human condition of suffering. This is in chapter number 2. As I was saying, Sankhya Yoga, the highest truth, which says that the self is indestructible. So if you're worried about people dying and this, that, and the other, it is not the truth. The truth is that the self is indestructible. What you are seeing in front of you is the body is falling. So if you take that into account, then there is no need to grieve. And he says, how are you going to reach to this understanding and to have this transformation taking place? And so he introduces Karma Yoga, how to act in the world with this understanding that you are this indestructible self, which is the highest truth. And then he talks about the attributes of someone who has established himself or herself in this highest consciousness called the Brahmic Sthiti, which is establishing oneself in Brahman. So these three components actually is what we can see. If anybody asks you what is Bhagavad Gita about, you can say it is about the highest truth. It's about how to act in the world and how to get established in Brahman. Okay, so this is really the underlying major themes which are there throughout Bhagavad Gita, and we can kind of go back again and again to this structure which is there in the Bhagavad Gita and to understand each one of these verses in relationship to this concept. So Arjuna is then enlightened on the path of Karma Yoga in chapter number 3. Arjuna asked the question about action and the path of renunciation. So idea is he is seeing this as, a kind of dichotomy between either you follow the path of action or you follow the path of contemplation and renunciation. And in his mind, he thinks that, it is either or. But of course, Lord Krishna is going to synthesize these two things in such a way, beautiful way, that both these things are absolutely necessary for one to have the complete inner transformation and to reach the ultimate truth. And then he goes on to describe about the nature and the inevitability of action, to understanding what action is and how action is, unavoidable in our lives, and the spirit of yajna and the wheel of action, which is functioning at the cosmic level. So, when we align ourselves to this wheel of action at the cosmic level, then we begin to function in a different way, and therefore we begin to align ourselves to the embedded truth in the universe in such a way that we begin to transform ourselves as well. So, how to perform action in the world? And here, role models are given, like Raja Rishi called King Janak, and I'll mention that again today. And the desire clouded mind, the enemy within, which I just talked about, the desire, and how this desire clouded mind functions at three different levels. Either it is completely clouded like the fetus in the womb, or it is like the dust on the mirror, or it is like the smoke in the fire. And these represents the three kind of gunas, which are the temperaments. Again, this is what Lord Krishna will talk about again in this chapter number 4. And he says that these are the different temperaments, and these temperaments then behave in the world in their own way. But each one can then proceed to function in the right way and proceed towards the ultimate destination of discovering the truth about themselves. So knowledge and action, again, he gives the relationship in the final verse of this of chapter number 3, and this is what we're going to continue our discussion about. So another way of understanding the flow of thought, which I've already mentioned to you, is that knowledge is there, practice, and then transformation. So knowledge is Sankhya, practice is yoga, and Sankhya and yoga combined together will bring about the inner transformation. Another way is to say selfless action, knowledge of the self, and then self-realization. Another way is to understand it as karma yoga, jnana yoga, and jnana nishtha. So as I was saying, this is the kind of underlying structure of the Bhagavad Gita, is that Sankhya, yoga, and jnana nishtha, which means that you become established in the knowledge. And to remember some of these kind of diagrams is important, because then, it gives you a clear idea as to what Lord Krishna is talking about and in what context he's putting the verse and relating to this idea about how to function in the world, how to live in the world, and how to have the highest knowledge so that you can become established in the truth about yourself. So again, to remind you about these 3 operating systems, which I've touched again and again, and I think another good way of kind of remembering what the Bhagavad Gita is all about. The first is the ego operating system. The second one is the dharma operating system, whereby we kind of go from a non-spiritual life to a spiritual life by functioning in a certain different way, in a dharmic way. And this is what is known as the process of purification. So self-centered, selfish attachment, me and mine, is what the ego individual does, whereas in the dharma operating system, one becomes God-centered, there is selflessness, and there is detachment. And in the God operating system, then one becomes humanity-centered, because you are only existing to serve humanity. There is nothing else for you to do. There is no self, there's no ego, there is full love and compassion towards humanity and each and individual in this on this planet. And this is the pathway towards self-realization. So one is the purification, the other part of the pathway is realization. And we can think of this in terms of what we are going to talk about today, in terms of action, knowledge, and renunciation. And this is by means of absorption and meditation in the higher self, so that we become established in the truth. Remember, Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Nishtha. So this is what really, again, is a reflection of that in a different kind of perspective. So if we go then to about what are we going to change? We're going to change the knowledge, we're going to change the beliefs, we're going to change the attitudes and the intentions. So this is what we are going to begin to transform by having the knowledge and having the right attitude and having the right intention, which then translates itself into the right kind of action. So the practice and the focus transformation is going to happen through listening, shravanam, reflecting, mananam, and then practicing. Now, this is the cycle of learning the knowledge and practice in the world, so that it become solidified within our way of functioning, and therefore leads to this inner transformation. Okay, so let's go to the first section of chapter number 4. And this is what Lord Krishna is going to reveal to Arjuna, the revelation of divine incarnation and its perfect purpose. So Bhagavan in this section makes several declarations. Number 1, the knowledge he is giving Arjuna is ancient, tracing it back to Vivaswan, the sun god to whom it was first given. So you can see this is right at the very beginning of time, when this knowledge was given to the sun god, and then it was passed on to Manu, etc. And here we are now, millennia later, learning about this knowledge. So imagine that this is not something which was invented last year, or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. It is much, much, much older than that. And this is what Lord Krishna is declaring to Arjuna, that this is ancient knowledge. I'm teaching you this thing which is not just made up by somebody. It is given to the sun god directly by me. And this is going to reveal then now who is this me who has revealed this knowledge to Vivaswan. There is a lineage, parampara, of handing down this knowledge from master to disciple. Okay? So when I'm teaching this knowledge, it is only because Gurudev's grace has allowed me to kind of contemplate on this knowledge and to be able to kind of teach it in my small little way. And this is the parampara which we are now following, so that when you have got this knowledge, you can also teach your children, you can teach your friends, and say, this is Bhagavad Gita, the most wonderful knowledge which can help us to live our life to perfection. And this Raja Rishis, the king sages, were the recipients of this yoga. And this is the interesting thing. It was given to the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas, who are the leaders of society, so that they are not only ruling the kingdoms, but they are protecting the society through this knowledge. Now, this kind of leadership is what we call authentic leadership. This is called ethical leadership. It is called spiritual leadership. And when all these things combine together in those ancient times, when this knowledge was given to these king sages, it was the most wonderful way in which they conducted themselves. And the lineage over time got broken because either there were lack of teachers, there were no teachers to pass it on, or the lack of students. For example, if we think about how many people actually come to these classes, how many want to understand, how many are interested, then we can see very few people. Not many people would be interested in this kind of knowledge, but this is like a treasure house. And if you don't realize that there is this wonderful knowledge which is available, then of course, the lack of students will make this lineage to get broken over time. So knowledge then becomes unavailable, it becomes unmanifest because this link is broken. So further on, Bhagavan makes this declaration. This knowledge is the same one being given to Arjuna, since he is a bhakta and a friend. Another important thing, that one has to be a friend of the Lord. One has to be a devotee of the Lord in order to get the right attitude within oneself, so that one becomes open to this knowledge. And this knowledge is then received in the right way. In other words, the transmission of knowledge may be there, but if the recipient is not ready, if he is not having the right attitude and the right belief and the right surrender, remember Arjuna surrendered to Lord Krishna, and therefore he is this bhakta who has surrendered to the teacher and said, teach me, tell me what to do. And therefore, being a bhakta and a friend of the Lord is really necessary for us to have this knowledge. So when Arjuna asks, how could he have given this knowledge to Vivaswan who existed millennia ago? And therefore, Arjuna is identifying Lord Krishna with this body. And of course, we see in, later on in chapter number, um, uh, going on from chapter number 12 onwards, that the revelation of Bhagwan, of what he really is, so much more beyond this limited body. So Bhagwan says, both of us have been through the many births. I know them all. You, Arjuna, you don't know any one of those. And here we see two things being introduced. The idea of human reincarnation, which was mentioned earlier in chapter number 2. Remember that Lord Krishna was talking about changing of clothes and how the jiva changes the bodies one by one, birth after birth after birth. So human reincarnation and divine incarnation, and there's a huge difference between these two things. And the fundamental difference is that the human birth is governed by karma and avidya, whereas the divine incarnation comes about because Lord Krishna himself is controlling this maya and beyond karma. So it is not karma which is making him to manifest, but rather that through his own kind of determination, he comes into existence and he has a purpose. So what is his purpose is going to declare. He is unborn. He's now talking about himself. He is unborn, imperishable, Lord of all beings, yet ruling over Prakriti, and by his own Maya, he manifests. So you can see that he is a ruler of Prakriti, and by his own Maya, he is becoming manifest in this form which is called the avatar. Avatar is beyond karma, beyond Maya, and he is the ruler of Prakriti. And not only that, but he is unborn, imperishable, Lord of all beings. Now, this is important to remember. Lord Krishna is going to tell him why it is important to remember. And here he tells him the purpose of manifestation. When there is a decline of dharma and a rise of adharma, he manifests. For the protection of the good and the destruction of the wicked, for the establishment of dharma, he is born. So now we can see not only that the knowledge which has been passed on from millennia is now being given to Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield, and the Lord himself is declaring why he is giving this knowledge. So that Arjuna is now the instrument of Lord's purpose. And we have to understand what our purpose is. Remember the MPV, meaning, purpose, values? This can be seen within that context of what is my purpose in life. My purpose is to understand what Lord Krishna is telling me and to go from my ego operating system to my dharma operating system, because then I am actually following the instructions of the Lord himself. And I know that he is there protecting us. I know that whatever is wicked, he's going to push aside, and he is here to establish dharma, and he is taken this avatar because of this purpose. The knowledge of his divine incarnation, the purpose of his action, liberates the seeker. So this is what he's saying, that if you know my divine incarnation, in other words, the nature of the avatar, the purpose of the avatar, the knowledge of this divine incarnation, if we know it and know the purpose of his actions, then liberation is definitely possible for us. So this is the revelation which Lord Krishna has given to Arjun, and not only the incarnation, but also how the knowledge has been passed on and how he is now giving this knowledge to Arjun to then re-establish dharma. So remember this, there is a kind of deeper sense in which Lord Krishna is talking about in giving this knowledge to Arjun. So he's saying that you are the instrument who is going to allow me to establish dharma. And besides everything else, here is the kind of teaching which is there in order for us to, to move on the path of dharma. So the next section then deals with action, knowledge, and the relationship to divine, because this is what Lord Krishna is synthesizing for Arjuna. He's saying it is not either or. It's not either you go on the path of action or you go on the path of contemplation. Here's how you have to see it in a different way, in a different perspective, so that it begins to come together in a unified, synthesized approach to spirituality. Okay. So Bhagavan says the knowledge of his divine incarnation, purpose of his action, liberate the seeker. Okay. Here is now the clear connection between selfless action, knowledge of the divine, and liberation. If I understand the divinity, if I understand the self, if I have the highest knowledge about the divine, and I know the purpose of his action, which is that I have to now think about how can I go from the ego identity towards the seeker identity and to operate through a dharma operating system, then these two things come together. Knowledge of the divine, selfless action in the world, and that is going to lead me towards liberation. So here are some points to ponder and practice. What is the knowledge of the divine and his actions, his manifestation and declared purpose? Just try to contemplate on that and become clear as to what Lord Krishna is telling us here. How does this then translate itself into practice? What is it that I can do in order to validate this and to translate it into my own life? What is attained by this practice? That is also important to understand. Liberation, but liberation of what and how? And how does this begin to manifest itself as I go through these practices? And how will you do or have been doing this practice in your own life? So think about that as well, because some of you are already following this spiritual path and you know what it means to do that, but a deeper understanding always helps us. So that, when the knowledge becomes synthesized with the action and both of these things work together in this beautiful way, that its inner transformation is absolutely available to us. And therefore, think about how will you do it? Or if you've been doing it, how can you deepen your practice? Okay. So in other words, when we know who he is, we know who we are, and with this knowledge, we move towards renunciation of action through discrimination and detachment. So renunciation of action also has got a special meaning, as we'll see later on. But really speaking, what it means is that I have to know the divine, I have to know myself, and I have to have this knowledge. And when I put this into my practice through discrimination and detachment, then I'm moving towards renunciation of action itself. As we act selflessly in the world, we dedicate all our actions to him and let him let go of the fruit of the action. This is how we are being told to function in the world. Remember Karma Yoga last chapter, this is what it was all about. And we begin to realize through contemplation on the knowledge that we are not this ego individuality, not the doer of the action, nor the enjoyer of the results. This is the highest knowledge. And we have to keep it in mind. We have to keep it in our awareness of what this knowledge is. And not knowledge just intellectually, but also to feel it and to sense it and to be with it in the full awareness of it in the present moment, while we are carrying out our actions in the world. This is the kind of holistic approach to our spiritual life. So it is not just intellectual knowledge of the avatar, but a subjective experience of the supreme truth taking birth in our own hearts as our own self. This is the birth of Lord Krishna in my own heart. When I follow this pathway, when I understand his divine nature, when I know his divine attributes, when I know myself as nothing but this ego individual who is suffering in this world and wants to transform myself and to establish myself in the truth of not only the avatar, but myself, this real self, the experience of the Supreme, that needs to take place in my own heart. So this is really the relationship between the avatar, the knowledge which is being given to Arjuna at this time, the actions which he needs to carry out, and how liberation is possible through this kind of way of approaching. So in number 10 stanza in chapter number 4, this is a holistic system of self-development and enlightenment, freeing oneself from attachment, fear, and anger. Remember, this is Karma Yoga. And attachment, fear, and anger, what are those? Those are the indicators of the ego individuality. You have to free yourself from attachment, fear, and anger through selfless action, absorbed in and surrendered to Bhagwan, Bhakti. This is Bhakti, Bhakti Yoga, Saguna Upasana, as we've talked about before, and deep contemplation on the knowledge of the self, Jnana Yoga, Nirguna Dhyanam. So on the one hand, action, on the other hand, the knowledge, and the absorption in not only the Saguna form, but also the deeper contemplation on the knowledge of the self, Jnana Yoga, Nirguna Dhyanam. Then what happens? We will get enlightenment. So here is another way in which we can look at how we are going to reach our spiritual destination. And this gives us the holistic scheme of self-development on the path of spirituality. So again, points to ponder and practice. To what extent are you affected by attachment? Practical questions, things, beings, happenings, and why? Why do you think you're attached? And in what relationship do you experience anxiety, fear, and why? And what makes you angry, irritated, and why? So these are day-to-day, moment-to-moment practical things we can kind of think about and ponder. And think about the next two lines, which is, how can I surrender? How can I get absorbed in the thought of the Lord? And how can I deeply contemplate on this knowledge of the self so that these three things I can let go without any kind of reservation? How do these relate to your sense of yourself and relations to the world at the moment? And what can you do to free yourself from these through knowledge, devotion, action? Can you see Lord Krishna has brought these three strands, the major strands, the three pathways together, and telling us that if you follow these simple kind of steps of freeing yourself from these three things, absorbing and surrendering to Bhagwan, and then deep contemplation on the knowledge, then liberation is absolutely possible. Enlightenment is possible. So how is it going to be done? Again, to remind you, the 4 A's, the 4 B's, the 4 C's, the 4 D's. Now this should be, very clear in your mind by this time, that this is really the context and the way in which you're going to live your spiritual life with this kind of consciousness. Awareness, alertness, attention, etc. Just keep this in mind. Again, come back to it again and again if you need to, and see how you can incorporate this in your day-to-day life. Not only spiritual life, but even anything else which you do. It will let you understand this ego self much better, and it will give you a commitment to the seeker's life, and it will give you the right attitude to sadhana and abhyas. Okay, so motive power, approach to life and consequences is given in stanza 11. So just as petrol gives power to the vehicle, so also life and will are given by Bhagwan himself. Just as the power in the car is used differently by different people for different destination, so also will and intention take each person towards different goals. So power is there within us. This sentiency which is there, the life vitality which is there, which is given to us by Bhagwan, and this we use it in different ways depending on our temperament. And each one is based on choice according to belief, attitude, and the meaning, purpose, and values. So again, he will bring this into the context of the four types of personalities or temperaments, which are based on guna and karma. Now, this caste system, as it is known, it has become controversial, politicized, socialized, whatever it is. But this purely in the context of what Lord Krishna is talking about, because this is located in chapter number 4, and he's talking about guna and karma in relationship to the way in which people function and how they need to understand themselves within this context of guna and karma and the four temperaments. So this is, each person has got a swabhav, which is defined by attributes and actions. And these are the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And they give rise to four types of personalities, each one thinking and behaving in different manner and acting in the world in a different manner. And this temperament is acquired through many lives of experience. It is not only this life, but we have been carrying on forward this storehouse of vasanas, carried forward in each life. We acquire some more vasanas, lose other vasanas. This is the storehouse of vasanas which we have come even in this life. These vasanas are there, and it determines the kind of temperament which we have. So each one of us has got a guna karma personality by experience, not by birth. So you can't say, I'm a born Brahmin, therefore I behave like a Brahmin. Actually, Lord Krishna is talking about guna and karma. He's not talking about where you're born and how you're born. So if you want to know your personality, your guna personality, go to this website. There's a free personality test called Vedic Personality, and you can try it yourself. Okay, and you will know what kind of person you are in terms of these four classification. Brahmin, predominantly sattvic, action oriented, directed towards spiritual life. Sattvic and rajasic, which is a kshatriya. Ethical, sattva, energetic, rajas, leadership. Vaishya is one who has rajasic and tamasic tendencies, energetic, rajas, and self-centered living, tamasic. And sudra, this tamasic, indulgent, physically centered existence. So these are the kind of four personalities which are derived from the three gunas, and the temperament is really according to the gunas, and how they behave in the world is related to this temperament. There is a pathway each follows in life and obtains and bears the consequences of their actions. So whatever we are doing it in the context of these gunas, and that is how we function, because our vasanas are also have got a texture of the gunas. Okay, so think of vasanas as sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, and the mixture of those give a certain definition to our temperament, and that is how we behave in the world. So each person has got a choice in following either their swabhav, which is the ego operating system as it is operating now with his vasanas, whatever is going on, or the dharma operating system. This is your choice. You have to make a choice. And therefore, this purification can only take place if you make those right choices. So knowing the divine as one not tainted by action, nor has desire for the fruit of the action, you, Arjuna, and all seekers get liberated as was done even in the ancient times. Remember, Lord Krishna is saying this is not recently invented knowledge. This is something which was there millennia ago. So it has been proved, it has been validated, and therefore have no doubt about this knowledge. Know the divine as the unborn, imperishable, as the sentient force behind all life, as the one with the purpose of restoring dharma and protecting the good and destroying the bad. And know yourself in your own swabhav and work towards purification through karma yoga. Act in the world with knowledge of the divine as your own self, renouncing the fruits of the action and eventually action itself. Okay. So let's come to the next section, which is the secret of right action, wrong action, and inaction. So you can see that, Lord Krishna is following a kind of logic. There is a flow of thought which is there. So just trying to grasp this thing about revelation of the divine incarnation and its purpose, why is there to establish dharma, how that is going to be done, and how action, knowledge, and relationship to the divine has been kind of given to us in the previous section, and how they combine together to give us this holistic approach to liberation, to realization. So now Lord Krishna is going to go a bit deeper into the into the idea of action, because we need to understand action in several different ways. So this is how we can think about it. So just giving a kind of overview of the whole section, there is this relative standpoint. Relative standpoint is where we are located at the moment. This is the transactional life. And you and me are this individual self who have identified with this body, mind, intellect. We see ourselves as the doer and the enjoyer. And we carry out actions in the world according to our temperament, which has just been described to us by Lord Krishna. And this is our transactional identity. And we carry out karma and vikarma. So karma are the ones which are the right actions, one can say, and vikarma are the wrong actions. So we are carrying out actions in this kind of way. This is how we are living at the moment. On the other end of the reality, as it were, is the absolute standpoint. So if we look at it from the absolute standpoint of view, then the self, the Atman, is a non-doer. It does not do anything. It is just there to give us sentiency. It is pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss. It is not doing anything. Okay? And it is in a state of inaction, actionlessness. And this is the transcendental identity, and it is called akarma, no karma. Okay? So what is the relationship between these two things? One is a relative standpoint, the other one is the absolute standpoint. And the whole journey for us is to go from this individual self as the doer and the enjoyer who is suffering in this samsara and functioning in life in a certain way, to go to the absolute standpoint. This is the knowledge. This is the ultimate destination, the Brahmic sthiti, which was described to us at the end of chapter number 2. This is the transcendental reality called Brahman. So we want to go from this selfish ego individuality to our true identity, and this is the absolute standpoint from where we can kind of have this pure consciousness, pure existence, pure bliss. So this is our journey. And how is it going to be made? By right action, right knowledge, right belief, right attitude, right intention. So this is what is given in 4.16 and 4.17. Now, the relationship between action and inaction. So from the absolute standpoint of view, one can say there is inaction, but in relationship to action which is taking place at the transaction level. From the relative standpoint of view, we can say action is taking place in inaction. Now, this is a bit to kind of put our head around, because it requires a bit of contemplation, and I'm sure you're going to get there. But inaction is really the pure consciousness. Action is taking place at the level of the body, mind, intellect. We have to see how action which is being carried out in the seeker identity, how that can be connected to the inaction, which means how it can become aware of its absolute identity and function within the knowledge of that absolute identity. Therefore, it becomes action in inaction. Okay. So come back to this diagram again and try to contemplate on it, because this is really giving an overview of what Lord Krishna is talking about in terms of action and inaction. So the true yogi knows action in inaction and inaction in action. Quite a mouthful, but this is really important for us to understand, because it brings together the path of knowledge and the path of action in a very systematic, synthesized way. So undertakings are without any desire or self-serving purpose. Action have been burnt in the fire of knowledge. So action being burnt in the fire of knowledge means what? It means that I've disidentified even from the action. The fruit of the action have been abandoned, ever content, depending on nothing, does not do anything, yet is engaged in action, without hope, Mind self-control has abandoned all sense of mind, does only bodily action, does not incur any sin, content with whatever comes to him, free from dualities and envy, even-minded, though acting, is not bound, and devoid of attachment, who is liberated, mind is established in knowledge. Acting for the sake of yajna, sacrifice, all his actions are dissolved. So there is a series of verses which talks about this true yogi, perfect yogi, who is able to live in this kind of way of action in inaction, and therefore the action and the knowledge, the path of karma yoga and the path of jnana yoga are coming together in this way, whereby with this mind established in this highest knowledge, the actions are also dissolved, because there is no longer any identification with the body, mind, intellect, not even with the seeker's identity. That has all disappeared. Therefore, you are no longer carrying out any actions, because you have lifted yourself. Just like I showed you in the last diagram, you have lifted yourself into the absolute standpoint. Okay, so again, points to ponder, practice, and understand these, because here's a list of things which you can take up for practice. Okay, this can be done on a daily basis. Take one of these and see how you can actually begin to put it into practice in your own lives. So in one verse, Bhagwan brings all the concept of action, knowledge, and renunciation together. This actually is a famous food prayer. So, if we put this food prayers in the right context, this is in chapter number 4, verse number 24. It is within the context of bringing action, knowledge, and renunciation together in one verse. And that is why we say it as a food prayer, because it is a representative of our attitude which needs to be there, not only before we sit down for the meal, but throughout the day. This consciousness has to be carried with us all this time. Brahmapanam brahmahavi brahmagno brahmanahutam brahmevatena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. This is a food prayer which we say, Brahman is oblation, Brahman is the clarified butter, Brahman is the offering, Brahman is the oblation poured into the fire of Brahman. Brahman shall verily be reached by him who always sees Brahman in all actions. Here's the key point. Brahman will be reached by him who always sees Brahman in all actions. Can you see how action and the highest knowledge, Brahman, are combined together to give us the liberation which we are seeking? So think of this prayer as a very important thing. Action offered to God with clarified thought and feeling, everything done with consciousness of the ultimate truth. We can just translate it in this kind of way, so that we understand how does it apply to our individual life in terms of our spiritual practice. Action is offered to God with clarified, not clarified butter, but clarified thought and feeling, and everything is done with consciousness of the ultimate truth. In the moment when I'm carrying out my action, this consciousness of the ultimate truth is always with me. My thought and feeling are clear, and actions are offered to God. This is what this verse is combining together: action, knowledge, and renunciation. So, how do we use this wonderful verse in our lives? Memorize this verse if you're not already done so. Chant it at all meal times before you eat. Contemplate on the deeper meaning of this verse. Who is the doer? What is action? How it is done? What is knowledge? With the context and awareness, each action is carried out. Every day, pick up a time or a particular activity and do it. Bring the reflection of this verse to your mind before you start, before the action. Center yourself in the sense of being that is without action, in terms of the highest knowledge of the self. Keep the awareness of this knowledge as you do the actions, and after the actions, center yourself again in this sense of being that is without action. Actionlessness, action. Action in actionlessness means that you center yourself in the sense of being and carry out your actions. Perceive everything as Brahman, the ultimate reality. So this chapter number 4 is wonderful. It is bringing us the two things together in a most um, fantastic way through this just one verse of what we have seen only as this food prayer. It is a much, much more profound thing to understand. There's a depth of knowledge which applies to us within the context of this chapter, and we have to understand it how we can apply it in our own life. Now, to go further, action as sacrifice in the highest knowledge. So we have seen how this particular, logic is flowing to us through the words of Lord Krishna from chapter number 2 about Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga and what you call the Sthita Prajna Lakshana, and then chapter number 3 about Karma Yoga, and this chapter number 4, how all these are coming together. And in this chapter, there is again a flow of thought, revelation of the divine, incarnation and its purpose, action, knowledge, relationship to the divine coming together, and then the secret of action, which I just talked about. And here we now go to the action as sacrifice. So again, this key idea in Bhagavad Gita about yajna, sacrifice. So it gives example of 12 sacrifices. So Lord Krishna is always giving examples so that we understand this very clearly. It's not a question of, oh, what does this mean? Yeah, there is no question of that, because Arjuna wants very clear description. He wants Lord Krishna to tell him decisively what to do. And that means that he has to give a very clear knowledge, which is available to us as well. So what is a sacrifice? Yajna. It's derived from the Sanskrit yaj, to worship, adore, revere. An action which is carried out in the present moment, with full awareness of self-knowledge and oneness of Brahman, without identification with the action, without attachment to the fruit of the action. And like the movement of the wave, water in the ocean, from the ocean, in the ocean, by the ocean, for the ocean. This is the image you have to kind of keep in mind when we are talking about this yajna and how it is to be done. Full awareness of the knowledge of Brahman. Action is carried out in the present moment with this awareness, without identification with the action or without attachment to the fruit of the action. See how wonderfully Lord Krishna has brought this together, and at the physical and mental and intellectual levels, these all combined together to give us an idea of this spirit of sacrifice, yajna spirit, which we talked about in the last chapter as well, at the cosmic level and also at the individual level. So he gives 12 sacrifices, examples, level of the body, sacrifice to the devas, and you can read this up and understand each one of them. But simply put, these are sacrifices which function at different levels, sounds and other sense objects into the fire of the senses, hearing and the other senses in the fire of restraint, function of the senses and the breath into the fire of restraint, wealth as sacrifice, dhanam. So it is also seen as a sacrifice, prana outgoing, prana incoming as sacrifice, regulated diet as sacrifice. So you can see at the level of the body, there's so many things, object of the senses themselves, the mind, restraint, which is taking place in terms of the breathing and so on. At the transactional level, giving wealth out, prana at the level of the pranic body, the pranamaya kosha, there is sacrifice which can be done as well. Regulation of diet as well. And at the level of the mind and the intellect, sacrifice in the fire of knowledge, of Brahman, Swadhyay, study of scriptures, Jnana Yajna, knowledge as sacrifice by ascetics, self-restraint and rigid vows, austerity as sacrifice, tapas. This is also seen as sacrifice, yoga as sacrifice. And of course, some of this may kind of seem to overlap. Okay, but just to understand, this is what we are talking about in terms of sacrifice. And Gurudev says that sacrifice, yajna, is sacrificing work undertaken in the spirit of self-dedication for blessing of all. So taking another kind of perspective, that this work is done in a spirit of self-dedication, and this self-dedication is dedicating to the higher for the blessing of everybody around you, living a truly dharmic life, a truly spiritual life. So again, points to ponder, reflect, and understand these practices. Take up practice of one of these or more on a daily basis. So there's no shortage of practices in this wonderful text called the Bhagavad Gita. And do take up any of these things. Svadhyaya, I know most of you are doing study of the scriptures. People are doing tapas of one way or the other, and so on and so on. So it is to kind of formalize these practices in such a way that it begins to have this transformative effect. Just to remind ourselves again, in the context of sacrifice, what does this mean? We have seen that, the ego operating system and the dharma operating system, and it is all about purification. Sacrifice then means action, knowledge, renunciation coming together in the way in which I have just described. So here's another way of looking at it. Here's the ego individual, here's a seeker, and here's a person of wisdom. And ego individual functions selfish action and ignorance, which is called action, and selfless action in knowledge, action in inaction, and then actionlessness, established in the truth. You are not doing anything. You are at the absolute standpoint. You are in the state of Brahmic consciousness, and therefore there is no action being carried out. Again, purification, self-realization, action, knowledge, renunciation at this level, and in the second stage of spiritual development, absorption, meditation in the spirit of sacrifice. So can you see how these things are coming together in this wonderful way? And again, to kind of point out the relationship between action and knowledge. This is the spirit of sacrifice, and this is how it is going to be done. So there are innumerable sacrifices spread out at the face of Brahman, truth, knowledge, all born of action. Know the relationship between action and knowledge. Act in the world in the spirit of yajna. Become liberated. And Lord Krishna says, eaters of the remnants of yajna go to eternal Brahman, purification. This world is not for the non-performance of sacrifice, because you'll get caught up in suffering, you'll get caught up in the cycle of birth and death, keep on coming back again and again and again, because the lesson has not been learned. So we need to eat the remnants of yajna. In other words, that what comes out of our way of living in this spirit of sacrifice is that we will experience this purification and then go to eternal Brahman. So this last section is going to talk about knowledge sacrifice and the sword of knowledge. So again, just to remind ourselves, sacrifice is a way of being and working in the world in thought, word, and deed, immersed in this knowledge of the absolute. So jnana, knowledge, yajna is superior to dravya, objects, yajna. This is what Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, that knowledge sacrifice is superior to the sacrifice of material things, and therefore you have to keep that in mind, because if you do this knowledge sacrifice, in other words, that you do things with this consciousness of the highest knowledge, then what will happen? All actions will culminate in knowledge of the divine self. So therefore, he's putting emphasis again on knowledge. In the previous chapter, it was about Karma Yoga. Now he's bringing knowledge as also something very important for us to have in order to reach the ultimate destination. And this is culminating in the knowledge of the self, our own self, which is our truth, and it is the divine self. So how is this knowledge going to be acquired? That's the next question you may ask. How can I get this knowledge? By long prostration, pranipatena, by intense questioning, pariprashnena, by serving, savior of who? To the wise who have gained this knowledge will instruct you in this knowledge. In other words, how do you go to your teacher? You go to the teacher with long prostration. In other words, that you are now surrendering, you're having this humility, you're approaching as a disciple in the right way and through intense questioning. Remember, it's not about passive listening. It is about intense questioning. So not questioning for debating, not questioning for the sake of proving yourself right, but questioning because you want to know the truth. This is what questioning is all about. And then serving the master, serving in many different ways. And we've seen how, service to the Lord, service to society, service to the family in so many different ways becomes the way in which we have to function. And this is service to the teacher. And he will give you this knowledge. He has already gained this knowledge, and he will give you this and give you instructions in this knowledge. So this is how the knowledge is going to be gained. And once you gain this knowledge, you shall not get deluded again. There is no delusion. There's no going back. And Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita several times that it is a one-way street. Once you go there and you reach the destination, there is no coming back. And this means that once the delusion is gone, it's gone forever. You can't have degrees of delusion. It is either there or not there. So either you are in this ego state or even the seeker state, you may have purified yourself, but you may not have realized yourself. But once the realization has taken place, then there is no delusion. There is no going back again to in this state of delusion again. And you shall see all beings in yourself and in me. Remember, he is now talking as this divine. He's not talking about himself as this friend of Arjuna. He's talking about me as this divinity, me as avatar, as Krishna. You shall see all beings in yourself and in me. Now, this has got the wider meaning of the Advaita Vedanta, which talks about the oneness of reality. Okay? The substratum of our existence is Brahman, and this is when we reach that state of Brahmic consciousness, then everything is seen as one. We see all beings in ourselves and we see everything in the divine. So all in one and one in all. This is what we'll come to later on in the chapters which follow from the first six set of the chapters. And when we go to the second set of six, we will see everything to do with the divine, the description of the divine. And then what happens? You shall cross the ocean of sins by the raft of knowledge, even if you are the most sinful. So in other words, whatever the state of your individual ego identity. Now, sinful here doesn't mean that you've been doing wrong things. It just means that you have completely identified with this ego identity, this body, mind, intellect, and therefore this is, the Vedantic way of understanding sin is to say identification with the body, mind, intellect, living in this duality and living in this way of the ego operating system. So you shall cross the ocean of sins by the raft of knowledge. And this is samsara, and we have to cross this samsara with the raft of knowledge. And even if we are totally identified with the body, mind, intellect, ego, individuality, there is still a way out. All actions will be reduced to ashes in the fire of knowledge, complete non-identification with the doership. This is the important verse now here. See how action and the fire of knowledge come together to give us a complete non-identification with this sense of doership. The enjoyership has already gone. Do you know how this enjoyership has gone in the last chapter? Because we have detached from the fruit of the action. So the enjoyership has gone, and now the doership is going because all the actions will be reduced to ashes in the fire of knowledge itself. And here Lord Krishna says, there is no greater purifier of the me and the mind, pavitram, than knowledge itself. The yogi living in the spirit of sacrifice finds it in his own self in due time. Here's the promise. It says that living in the spirit of sacrifice, we will find our own self. This knowledge is not only going to purify us, but give us the highest state of our true identity, which is Brahman, and it will lead us to liberating ourselves from this samsara, this ego identity, this cycle of birth and death. Okay? So therefore, having full faith, having devotion and determination, having subdued the senses, you obtain the knowledge of self-realization and self and go to the supreme peace. Param Shanti. This is what is the supreme peace, and this is equivalent to saying Ananda, supreme bliss. This is what is obtained through realization, and again giving us three things what need to be borne in mind: having full faith, having devotion, determination, and subdue the senses. If on the other hand you have no faith, or in ignorance of this knowledge have doubts, then there is no happiness, peace in this world or even the next. So this is again very clear instruction from Lord Krishna. And having renounced actions by yoga, having destroyed all doubts by knowledge, having centered in the self, you will not be bound by any action. Freedom in action, centered in knowledge. Okay. So bringing again the action and the knowledge and the renunciation of action in knowledge is being given to her here as a kind of summary. And therefore, cut asunder the doubt in your own heart, is telling Arjuna. Of the self. There's doubt in yourself about the self. Forget about it. Cast it asunder, cut it asunder, and it is only born out of ignorance. Take refuge in yoga. So knowledge and action brought together again. Arise, O Bharat. Stand up and fight. This is the call to us as well. Stand up and function in the world. Do your thing which needs to be done by doing what? Having renounced actions in knowledge, having destroyed all the doubts by knowledge, having centered in the self, working moment to moment, being present in the moment with this full awareness of the knowledge, and functioning in the transactional world, having freed ourselves from the fruit of the action and now action itself. This is the call to us as well, not only Arjun, but also to us to arise and stand up and do your thing. And it is a wonderful kind of summary for us to remember again and again what we have to do. So what will you do now? Again, reminding you of the conscious way of spiritual living. 4 A's, 4 B's, 4 C's, 4 D's. This you should kind of memorize so that anytime you can pick it out and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm doing it. And of course, we'll come at a certain point whereby I'm going to tell you about the 9 tools of the spiritual toolkit. And these are now very handy to pull out in moment to moment the practice of spirituality as well. And you can use those as well. So the 4 A's, B's, C's, D's, this is the conscious spiritual living. If you want to live a spiritual life, try and bring this into the context of your own life, your own transactions. And what will you do now? Again, more homework. Listen, read, and reflect on the content of chapter number 4. Ensure that you understand the relationship between karma, vikarma, akarma. Again, reflect on the idea of sacrifice, understand the relationship with knowledge, clarify the relationship with all action and supreme knowledge. Reflect the different types of sacrifices which are there and how you personally incorporate them in your own life. And remember what are the key elements of Karma Yoga and how will you practice them. This was in the previous chapter, but again, bringing it back into this context of chapter number 4, which is about renunciation of action. Memorize verse number 4 and 7. 4.7 and 4.8 because it describes the avatar and its purpose, and the food prayer 4.24. Take up the indicators of a yogi 4.19 to 4.23 one by one and practice them daily. So there's no shortage of practice. If you tell me now, I don't know what to practice on Bhagavad Gita, here it is. Lots of things which you can take up and practice. And while you're doing any work, sacrifice it in the fire of knowledge, stay immersed in the knowledge centered in the self. Enjoy your sadhana, stay safe, and stay well. Thank you so much. And we will come back again to the screen, and I will ask
Jayashree.
Jayashree I am so much in the thought of that temporarily I kind of have to bring myself back into the awareness.
That's okay.
Thank you, Jayashree. Closing prayers, please.
Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschet Dukha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Om न तत्र सूर्यो भाति न चन्द्रतारकं नेमा विद्युतो भान्ति कुतो यमग्निः तमेव भान्तमनुभाति सर्वं तस्य भासा सर्वमिदं विभाति बोलिए श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय हरि ओम.
Thank you so much. And as I said, that I'm dedicating this session to my Bhavi, Jayaben, who passed away at 8 o'clock tonight, 7 o'clock tonight. And she passed away in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm dedicating whatever I have said, whatever prayers we have spoken, I dedicate to her memory. Hari Om, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramesh.
And our condolences. Thank you.
Our condolences, Ramesh Bhai. Thank you very much.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Sincere
Hari Om.
Hari Om, Ramesh Bhai.
Hari Om.
Hari Om, Ramesh Bhai.
Hari Om.
Hari Om, Ramesh Bhai.
Thank you, Hari Om Ramesh ji. Thank you.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om, Ramesh Bhai.
Hari Om.
It's difficult to know what to say at this time, Ramesh Bhai. My deepest sympathies to you, my prayers are for you and your family.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you so much. Hari Om.
You have shown one marvelous way of Gita as practiced.
Thank you, Vivekji.
Hari Om, Ramesh Bhai.
Hari Om.
My condolences.
Thank you so much, Nana.